Hello and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. And as always, I'm super excited to have a special guest with me today. Today we're recording this in Salt Lake City, kind of downtown. We have 7 people who are here watching. You can't see them, but I'm happy to have a bit of an audience here. And we're here to interview Jeremy Runnells. Jeremy, we're going to get into his story, but some of you may have heard of the letter to a CES Director. CESletter.com, I think, is the website. The short story, just to hook you into the interview, is that Jeremy was struggling with his testimony, lived a very traditional, devout LDS life until the point where he started having questions. And eventually his grandfather found out about this and offered for Jeremy to write a letter to a CES director friend of his grandfather. He wrote the letter. The letter was received, but was never responded to. But it was such a good letter, I guess he got good feedback from it, that he has kind of expounded upon it and published it to a web page. And it definitely has been a phenomenon sweeping intellectual Mormonism. And it's impacted a lot of people. So we're going to talk about it today. This is part of a multi-part series. So after we're done with this interview, I've invited Brad Kramer, who I've interviewed a few sessions ago, who's a faithful sort of scholar. He's going to sort of defend the believing positions. And I've invited J. Nelson Seawright, who is a professor at Northwestern University, and he's a non-believer. And they're good friends, and they're going to have kind of a very gentlemanly discussion about letter to CES Director, pros and cons and perspectives about it. So this is a long series, but I'm loving every minute of it. So without any further ado, Jeremy Runnells, welcome to Mormon Stories.
Thank you for having me.
So before we begin, Jeremy, you are deaf. Why don't you talk just about that for just a second?
Sure. I'm actually deaf in both ears, and I hear through what is called a cochlear implant. And it might be better to explain through a video. So just watch this video and it will just go over how cochlear implants work.
In a cochlear implant system, sound enters a microphone and travels to an external mini-computer called a sound processor. The sound is processed and converted into digital information. This digital information is sent over a transmitter antenna to the surgically implanted part of the system. The implant will turn the sound information into electrical signals that travel down to an electrode array inserted into the tiny inner ear or cochlea. Bypassing the damaged inner ear, the cochlear implant provides an entirely new mechanism for hearing.
Real quick, were you born deaf?
I was born hearing,
Okay.
and when I was about 3 or 4 years old, I was diagnosed with hearing loss. At first it was mild hearing loss, and then over the course of 20 years, it just progressively got worse. In the course of 20 years, I wore hearing aids, and when I was about 24 years old, after I came home from my mission, I got my first cochlear implant in my left ear, and about 7 years later, I got my second cochlear implant, and it just totally changed my life.
Excellent. Well, let's just jump in then. Tell us just briefly about your early experiences with the church. Were they positive? Tell us about the level of testimony you obtained before it started unraveling, and just a high level, any positive experiences you've had with the church. Just sort of tell us to what extent you were committed and believing before things started unraveling.
Sure. I was born into a faithful home. My parents were married in the Salt Lake City Temple. I was born in Whittier, California, and throughout my life, I lived in different cities in Southern California. My parents were, strong believing Mormons. I come from a pioneer heritage. I have family all the way back to Nauvoo. They traveled the plains to, Utah. I always believed in the church. I just grew up Mormon. I did the whole 9 yards. I was baptized when I was 8 years old.
Where were you growing up in the church?
This is in Southern California.
Okay. In the Whittier area.
Yeah, Orange County, parts of Los Angeles.
Okay.
I was just went to church my entire life. I was baptized when I was 8 years old by my dad, and my parents were divorced when I was 3 or 4 years old, so that had a really profound impact on my life, on the life of my brothers, my family. That's an interesting situation right there. My parents, as they were going through the divorce, it kind of got hairy in the courts. And so somehow they got I'm not sure if my dad proposed the idea or the bishop came to them, but it was proposed that instead of the judge in the court deciding, which kid goes with who, we would have the bishop do it.
Oh.
Yeah. And so it wasn't like this bishop was, a judge or a social worker or anything. He was a financial planner. So I sound qualified. But at the time, it shows you how strong my parents believed. I mean, maybe this man has inspiration. He would know what God would want for a family. So from what I understand, the bishop decided, me and my oldest brother would go with my dad, and my other brother would go with my mom. And so that was pretty devastating to my mom. From what I understand, it created a pretty crazy situation over there. Word spread around in the ward and the stakes in that area. From what I understand, it was mostly negative because they just couldn't believe how, a bishop would decide this. A lot of people felt that it should have been the courts. I'm not sure all the details, that's my understanding, but I just want to bring that up just to illustrate how strong my family believed in Mormonism, and so it started that. I lived with my dad my entire childhood. I had a great childhood. Both my parents loved me, and it was great. When after my parents divorced, my dad remarried, and that was an interesting situation because my dad had 4 kids, and the new woman that he married had 4 kids. So it was a Brady Bunch situation. So, that marriage lasted about 6 years. After that, we moved over to La Mirada, California. And I would say that that's where my testimony really took off. I went to church my entire life. I was baptized when I was 8, but I didn't really know what I was, going to church for. I didn't really understand, the Restoration and Joseph Smith and, what the church really stood for. So when I was about 12 years old, I was ordained a deacon, and this was around the time when interesting things happened. For the first time in my life, there was a death in my family. So I was a 13, 14-year-old that really impacted me. This was my grandpa. So I never really experienced death or the concept of death. I mean, I've, seen Rambo or whatever, TV shows and movies. But this was, for the first time in my life, somebody that I actually knew one day was there, and the next day he was gone. So that had a profound impact on me. This happened in September 17th, 1994. And then another powerful event in my life happened on about a week later. My dad arranged with our stake president, to meet with the area authority at the time, Elder Lansby Wickman. And we met with him for me to get a hearing blessing. And so what we wanted to do is, basically I went to him to see if he could restore my hearing, because as a teenager, it was a tough situation, not being able to hear very well, in my circle of friends in school, and so it was a tough situation. I really believe that, all the stories that I read and heard in church about Christ healing, the deaf and the lame and the blind. And I really believed in the concept that, the church was restored in these latter days and the priesthood is real. And if it worked then, why can't it work now? And so we met with the stake president, me, my dad, and the stake president went over to where Elder Lansby Wickman was at the time. It was when we met Lansby Wickman, something weird happened. When I went up to him, I shook his hand, and I experienced this really powerful wave of emotion. It was just looking back, I kind of compare it to kind of getting hit in the face, in that sense of shock, confusion. But basically, when I shook his hand, I just had this surreal feeling, and from then on in my life, I identified that as the Spirit. Basically, I met with this special servant of the Lord, member of the 70, and he just I just felt the Spirit. He was very gracious, very kind. The entire meeting was very spiritual. He gave me a blessing that basically stated that my ears would be unstopped and my hearing would be restored. So it's pretty bold. My dad was in tears, I was in tears, and it was just a very special day. And I consider that one of the most spiritual, special days of my life. So I had faith that my hearing was going to be restored. I mean, I was expecting next week to put my hearing aids down. I was expecting my hearing issues to be resolved. That was just the kind of faith that I had as a kid. I really believed that what happened that day with Elder Lansby Wickman, that my hearing would be restored. Well, that week went by, and then another week went by, and weeks turned into months and years, and my hearing just kept getting worse and worse. This kind of created a cognitive dissonance, in the sense of, he told me that my hearing would be restored and my ears would be unstopped, and my hearing getting worse over time. I was just wondering what was going on. Did I have enough faith, or I don't know. But anyway, I did the whole thing. I, deacon, teacher, priest. I was heavily involved in Boy Scouts. I had a great experience in Boy Scouts. I'm an Eagle Scout, and I enjoyed the troop that I was in. The Scout Masters were fantastic, just great men. The war that I was in was just fantastic. I had awesome bishops. One of the bishops was Hawaiian. So he just, every week, brothers and sisters, aloha. So there was that sense of community and sense of ward family. So I had a great experience overall. I went to EFY, especially for youth, in Provo, Utah, and I had some, spiritual experiences there. So it was just a cumulative effect of, that day when I got my hearing blessing, and, just the experiences that I've had in my ward family and EFY, and I've read the Book of Mormon. I've read all I could about Joseph Smith. I was very fascinated with Joseph Smith, because he was also similar to me, in the sense that he was about 13, 14 when he started having these questions about life. In my case, when my grandpa died, I just wanted to understand what was going on. Is there really a God? Is this church stuff that I'm going to, is it really for real? So I kind of identified with Joseph Smith in that sense of having questions and wanting to know about life. So just fast forwarding over to, when I was in high school, I had a lot of good friends, and a lot of them were non-members. One of them was my girlfriend. I had a girlfriend in high school. She was a non-member. Her family were Presbyterian, so that kind of played into the, like Joseph Smith, his family's Presbyterian. So I didn't understand Presbyterianism, but kept hearing about it in the history of Joseph Smith. So I just kind of was fascinated with that. But this family was just a wonderful family. They had it together. Mom and dad, the kids, well educated, they just loved each other. They also drank beer and wine. And it just caused me some kind of, I was looking at this family, this non-member family, and drinking alcohol. They were better in a lot of ways than a lot of Mormon families that I've met. So I kind of wondered about that, but I just kind of let it go. I was called on a mission to New York City to teach the deaf in American Sign Language. And this was 2000 to 2002. And it was just a powerful experience. I loved my mission. It was a mission like any other. I've had my ups and downs. I had my awesome companions, and I had my crazy companions.
Did you know sign language before your mission?
I did a little bit, but I didn't really understand how to do it. It really took off in the MTC.
Show us real quick how you would bear your testimony in sign. And talk as you say it.
I want to share my testimony that I know the church is true. I know the Book of Mormon is true. I know that Joseph Smith is a true prophet, that the church is restored in the last days. So that was kind of the testimony that I shared with deaf people on my mission. So my understanding of American Sign Language really took off from my mission. So I had a great mission president. He was a nice man, and on my mission, I've had some really amazing experiences in terms of just the people that I've met and the places that I've been. Most of my mission has been in the South Bronx and the whole island of Manhattan. So I've done things on my mission that I can't believe I've done. Like we would sometimes take the stairs in the projects at 8 o'clock at night. We were invincible. We have a name. We have the name tags. Jesus Christ, He's going to protect us. We're on the Lord's errand. But looking back, just some of the things we've done, going in the alleyways and the stairs, and we were in places that we really shouldn't have been. We've had a situation where NYPD pulled over and said, "Hey guys, you shouldn't be going there." You know what I mean? But we're invincible. We're on the Lord's errand. The NYPD, they don't know what they're talking about. So it was just kind of funny, just the confidence that I had as a missionary that I was really on the Lord's errand. We taught a lot of families. I've had success as a missionary. One powerful event on my mission was 9/11. So 9/11 happened on my mission. Just seeing the before and after of that event, it just blows my mind even to this day. Just the kindness that people had on the subways after that. It was just very interesting, the change as a whole in that city. Some of the families that I've taught, they had family members that were killed on 9/11. Just seeing the impact that 9/11 had on them, it was very, very up close and personal. I mean, I'm sure everybody else they've seen 9/11 on their television. I've seen it,
Like you remember, you could see the smoke billowing from where you were as a missionary?
Seeing the first tower collapse. And I wasn't like right next to it at the time. I was in the South Bronx, but I could go on my roof and see it. And the kind of an interesting story is 3 weeks before 9/11, my district, we went over to the World Trade Center. It's on a P-Day. And we just wanted to check things out. One of the things that we wanted to do was go up to the observation deck. And so this was near the end of the month when our savings account was diminished, because usually missionaries' accounts, their savings replenishes every, first of the month. So anyway, we went in to ask how much it would cost to go up to the observation deck. And we were told $13. And it was, to us, it was a lot of money at the time. And we were like, we'll come back later. And 3 weeks later, the whole thing was down. So it's just unbelievable that those buildings were massive, and it's just unbelievable that they're just 3 weeks later they were just completely gone. They were just in its own footprint. So yeah, that was my experience on my mission in terms of something that's just powerful. Just seeing the change in people. The change in the families that we taught. So I had a great mission. I asked to stay longer in my mission. I could have gone home in June of 2002, but I asked the mission president if I could stay another transfer, and so I ended up going back home in August. So I was really a dedicated missionary. I really believed in what I was doing, teaching people about Joseph Smith and restored gospel. So I came home and went to school. I went to BYU, and I had an overall good experience in BYU, majored in marketing, and it was pretty much uneventful. It was just a normal BYU college education. I really enjoyed my roommates. I met my wife in my junior year, and we met in the Wilkinson Center at BYU. So so kind of funny. It was like a really Mormon courtship. The Wilkinson Center at BYU, and we dated for probably 4, 5, 6 months before I took her down to the Grand Canyon, and just gave her the ring and asked her to marry me, and she said yes. We got married in the San Diego temple. That was also the temple, kind of going back, the San Diego temple was where I got my endowments. A lot of people, I've heard a lot of stories about, people having a terrifying experience going to the temple for the first time, or a very uncomfortable experience. To me, it was a little bit weird, but it wasn't completely shocking. I think part of the reason for that is I just, trusted family were there, and if they're cool with it, then I should be cool with it. But that was pretty much my temple experience. I was unable to go to the temple on my mission. The New York temple was not yet there, so the closest temple was the Boston temple. So for 2 years, no temple experience. My dad moved over. My dad moved over to Las Vegas during my mission. So when I came back home from my mission, it wasn't really home. It was Las Vegas. So it was kind of an adjustment there, giving a homecoming talk in a ward that I've never been in. So it was kind of a struggle at that time, as being in this place that I was unfamiliar with, this ward that I was unfamiliar with.
After being in kind of the same place for so long and having so many church memories.
Yeah.
With your California community.
Yeah, absolutely. So in some ways, it was that kind of struggle with the wards that I've been after my mission, trying to recapture that really sense of family that I had in California. And so
kind of shows how much of maybe what we perceive as testimony is really socially connected, right?
A big part of that. I mean, if I hate the ward and it's causing me misery, then that would be quite a big hurdle in order to keep going to church. So the social aspect of the church, the community aspect, is a major part of it. Yeah. But for me, I I didn't consider myself a social Mormon. I considered myself, I really didn't have a testimony. I really believed in, the first vision in 1820 and the Book of Mormon, a little history of, Christ's visit to the Americas and so on. I believe that Joseph Smith is a prophet. So that testimony is what grounded me, especially in some of the things that have happened after my mission. Some of the words that I didn't like, the singles words and all that. So to me, even though sometimes, I didn't like the word or I didn't really connect with some people, I still went every week because I was spiritually dedicated to the church.
So what led to you're starting to doubt?
So fast forwarding about 10 years to when I'm 30 years old, I still had my testimony. I was still going to church, still serving in callings. What happened was online on Facebook, I was hearing some, noises.
What year?
This was 2012.
2 years ago.
Yes.
Up until 2 years ago, you're a total traditional believer.
Yes.
Without serious doubts or concerns.
No, I mean, I can't think of any, I took everything literally. I can't think of anything that, like some people, they say they put things on the shelf and then eventually the shelf cracks. I didn't really have a shelf. I mean, it
was all true.
Yeah, it was all true.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Okay. So Facebook,
I was starting to hear stuff, about, people, there was a blog here and there about the church, kind of, talking about, it's like feminist housewives. I was just seeing all this stuff that I considered unapproved popping up on Facebook. And one night I was reading the news online and came across an article about Marlon King Jensen giving a Q&A at Utah State University. And in that Q&A meeting, he specifically stated, he was asked by someone in the audience what his thoughts were regarding the drove of members that are leaving the church over Google, over history. And his response was basically, we're experiencing an apostasy that we haven't seen since curling over history. So that shocked me. It shocked me in the sense of, I'm sorry, I need to go back a little bit. Just before my mission, this was when the internet was really coming out, and I was on AOL and stuff. I wanted to be prepared for my mission, so I went online and looked up stuff. And what I wanted to just kind of anticipate the different questions that would be asked by investigators. At the time, the church was true. Confirmation bias was in fourth gear. The church is true. What can I learn to prove that or back that up? So I looked up stuff. I came across, some of the Tanner stuff, but it was a lot of it was bizarre stuff. Like, Brigham Young says that there were men that look like Quakers that live on in the sun or something like that. Men live on the moon, or just really weird stuff that sounded so fake that I just didn't believe it. And I looked at everything in the context of Mormons against the other Christians, evangelicals. So it was like, evangelicals say that we believe in a different Jesus. Well, no, we don't, because Book of Mormon, this and that. So it was in that context. It wasn't in the context of,
none of it being true.
Yeah. It wouldn't be like, secularists talking about the church's history, using the church's own sources. It was more of, those crazy Baptists that were, you know what I mean?
Right.
So that was kind of my exposure, but I didn't come across any of the polyandrous stuff or the Book of Abraham stuff or any of that stuff. It was just really weird stuff, like some of the quotes that Brigham Young made. And so fast forwarding, but even that I didn't put anything on my shelf because I just quickly discredited it. Fair was awesome. Fair was doing the Lord's work. So, it's kind of funny now looking back, but Anyways, fast forwarding
we'll
over.
get to fair.
So fast forwarding back to that article, it shocked me that people were leaving over church history. I didn't understand why they were leaving over church history. What is it specifically about church history that they're leaving over? So one of the things that popped up was Joseph Smith's polygamy. So I pulled up Google and I typed in Joseph Smith's polygamy. And I learned, looking through Wikipedia, I learned that he had like 34 wives. And I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. I thought Brigham Young started polygamy. But then when I got into the polyandry, Joseph Smith was married to other living men's wives. That really shook me. That really shocked me.
Do you remember where you were reading that? What website or book?
Yeah, so the first time it was through Wikipedia. Then I went back into Google and I started looking some more, and I came across the polygamy page on Mormon Think.
Mormon Think.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of people seem to have that same route. And Mormon Think has a lot of pages on the search engine. But Mormon Think, it was unapproved. I didn't know if the information was reliable. But after looking at the polyandry stuff, I went over to the Book of Abraham and started seeing, what Joseph Smith, what his translation was, versus what Egyptologists state what it really means. And that really shook me as well. So basically, the polyandry and the Book of Abraham were the two first things that really shocked me. So I started looking on Amazon for different books that I could look at. One of them was Rough Stone Rolling. I ordered that. I also ordered Mormon Origins with Grant Palmer. Got those books, started devouring them and looking through them.
That's an insider's view of
Mormon Origins.
Mormon Origins.
Yeah. Those two books blew my mind. In the sense of, for example, Richard Bushman is obviously a faithful scholar in the church, and this is a book that was being sold in Deseret Book. And I remember this book at the BYU bookstore. So I knew that this was a, credible book, and it is a credible book. When I came across some of the stuff in there, he goes over the polyandry, and I just, I started having these feelings of betrayal, and just like I wasn't the village idiot. I read books. I read all the a lot of the approved books. I just couldn't believe that I never heard about the polyandry stuff, for example, or that Joseph Smith was married to 14-year-old girls. You know what I mean? And it just really shocked me in that sense. And knowing what I know now, that's the path that a lot of members take. It's not just being exposed to the information, but the feeling of betrayal in the sense, well, why hasn't the church told me this? Why haven't I learned this before? Why am I discovering this now at 30, 31 years old? And I've never heard of something as crazy as Joseph Smith marrying other living men's wives. What else don't I know about? And so that question really took me on this crazy path of research. I became absolutely obsessed with Joseph Smith, church history, and the origins of the church over the next year or two.
And what were your main sources of study or learning?
It was Rough Stone Rolling. I've looked at FAIR. I've looked at Mormon Think. I relied a lot on FAIR because, they were on the front trenches of this. I mean, Richard Bushman, it was more of a scholarly, wasn't really in the trenches in terms of apologetics. So FAIR just made things worse in the sense of I read about this and I learned about something new, and then that leads to something else, and it just created this this thing that just kept going on. I was learning this and this and that and this, and I don't know. I mentioned in my debunking that I really looked to faith as a lifeline during my faith crisis, and it ended up being, weight that drowned whatever left I had of a testimony. So yeah, that year was a struggle.
So that's 2012 to 2013, or
Yeah, so my faith crisis started in February 2012, and then just to give you an idea, I published the CES letter in April 2013.
Real quick, did you listen to Mormon stories during that time?
I did, actually. The Mormon stories was really something that made the landing softer. It gave me hope that things would be okay, that there was light at the end of the tunnel, that this was a process. It really explained or put into perspective that what I was going through was normal, in the sense that, there's cycles of grief, there's a process of learning about the things I'd never knew about in church. But all the different podcasts that I've listened to, I actually went to the Salt Lake Mormon Stories meeting in, I think it was June or July of 2012. I think it was a Presbyterian church. So that was a pretty powerful event, just listening to the different stories, listening to Andrew Ainsworth, just listening to his story. It was very powerful, listening to the different testimonies, the different experiences of people. Just seeing the people in that church, they weren't these boogeyman scary anti-Mormons or ex-Mormons. They were just people. They looked like me. They were just people that had different stories. So thank you for your work in Mormon stories. It really had a profound impact on me during my faith transition.
But we're not to blame.
No. But you probably get a lot of flack that, you're taking people out of the church. But in my case, it wasn't that. It was the opposite. You actually helped me become a better person. I wasn't as angry, if that makes sense. The alternative was going to xmormon.org or whatever and just getting riled up. But with you try to show, both faithful and ex-Mormon perspectives. And so it just really gave me a 180 view of things.
So tell us about what led to the CES letter. I guess my first question is, did you attempt to do anything online or publish anything prior to the CES letter? I saw this letter that's attributed to you to Elder Wickman.
No, it's actually, it was an open letter to Elder Cook.
Elder Cook, that's what I meant. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Was that your first time to publish something public, or?
Yeah, it was more of, I just put it on Reddit. I didn't think too much about it. I actually put it on Facebook for, an hour before my wife asked me to put it down.
When would that have been about? What month and year?
That was in October of 2012. You have to remember, my faith crisis happened in February 2012. And then by that summer of 2012, I was like, I don't believe in this anymore. So this happened in October of 2012. So I no longer had a testimony at that time. But somebody put a original version of this, and I thought it was so cool that I kind of borrowed it and revised, a paragraph here and there. And then I just put it on Reddit. But basically, it relates to Elder Cook's General Conference address in October 2012, where he was basically talking about, if you go and look at sources online, I can't remember exactly what the quote is on exactly, but it was basically, to the effect that if you look into unimproved sources, you're going to risk your testimony, and if that's the case, to repent. So I wanted to illustrate that you don't have to go to the Tanner's website or some other anti-Mormon website. Like, a lot of this stuff is in LDS sources. So the Rock and the Hat Book of Mormon translation, Elder Nelson talks about it in his 1993 July Insight. It's right there. I mean, the Journal of Discourses with, Adam God and all that. So I wanted to illustrate how even looking at the church's own sources can put a wrench into, your testimony, because when you see the stuff, you see how it's not correlating or aligning with the correlated version that you're getting from the church.
It's almost all church. It's either church published materials or like Joseph's diary, or diaries of people that we revere today. I mean, what else? What are the other sources?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like people are looking at the Hurlbut affidavits and that's like where they're basing their disaffection on. It's always like Journal of Discourses, the Book of Mormon text itself, comparing Book of Commandments to the early versions of the Doctrine and Covenants. Like, what's anti-Mormon about that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Joseph's own accounts of the first vision, like.
Yeah, exactly. And that was pretty much the point that I was trying to make in this satire.
Yeah.
I was kind of being sarcastic in that letter.
It reads a little bit angry, to be honest with you.
Well, of course, I was pissed off, and anybody that tells you that, when you leave the church, you should just leave it alone and don't be angry, don't be the angry apostate. They don't understand the trauma and the process of leaving. There's no such thing as a graceful exit from a church. There's no, thank you for your time and your 2 years. We appreciate it, and we wish you the best.
30 years.
Yeah.
40 years.
Yeah, and we thank you for the 2 years in the mission field. We love you, and we wish you the best and whatever. There's no such thing. You left because you want to sin, or you were lazy, or you never had a testimony. I've been told I never had a testimony. I had a testimony. Like, I love this church. It was just my worldview. It was the way that I looked at life. It was my heritage. It was, I love the people. So this nonsense of I never had a testimony is ridiculous. So anyway, so I wrote that satire, and looking back at it now, it was just, I don't see anything wrong with it, to be honest, other than it's sarcastic and maybe has a little angry tone. But what I was trying to illustrate in that was, I disagree with Elder Cook's, perception of the situation. Sure. So anyway.
So any false starts or attempts at doing something public other than that letter before the CES letter?
No, I mean, I was becoming more and more active on Reddit, but it was just,
In the ex-Mormon subreddit?
Yeah.
Okay.
It wasn't, it was just a comment here and there, so.
Okay.
Maybe
okay, so let's talk about how the letter came about.
So, I couldn't bring myself to tell my grandpa, my 85-year-old, or 83 at the time, grandpa, that I no longer believed in the church. I love that man. I just love that man. And, he lived Mormonism his whole life. He and my grandma, just wonderful people. They lived Mormonism for a long time, and they lived in Hawaii for 40 years. People have asked, what would it take for me to go back to the church? If I moved to Hawaii, I would go to church. The people there, I mean, the aloha spirit there, just unbelievable. The community is just unbelievable. It's just, to me, it's a different church over there. So I couldn't tell my grandpa about my disaffection and, what happened. But, a few other family members knew, my dad knew, and I guess it got to a point where, the rumors were going around, and so my dad told my grandpa that I no longer believed in church, or I lost my testimony. So I think it was around that, maybe just before Christmas, he found out, somewhere around there. So in 2013, he actually drove up to my place, about a 600-mile trip, a round trip. And just to come up and talk to me, see what's up and how he can help. We just had a conversation, and to me it was a tough conversation because I didn't want to. How do you tell somebody, okay, I don't believe because of this and that and this and this, without, you know, you don't want to put that on them. I didn't want to put it on my grandpa and, you know, somebody at his age. Anyway, but we had a good trip and a good visit. So he went back home, and a few weeks later, I received a phone call from him asking if I would be willing to meet with his friend, who is, you know, CES Director, just to see if I could get my concerns resolved and whatever questions I had. I said sure, even though I lost my testimony at the time. I still wasn't 100% sure that the church is false. I still accepted the possibility that my understanding of history and Joseph Smith and origins was incomplete or inaccurate, and that perhaps there was a perception that, or answers that the CES Director could provide. And also, this was at the time before the church released its essays. This was before I ever heard of the Swedish fireside rescue. So there was really not very much official answers from the church. So to me, this was an opportunity to get as close to official answers from a church that I could, because this is somebody that works for the church. He's in the church education system. So I said, sure, Grandpa, I'll talk to him. And so my grandpa forwarded him my information, and I was surprised the CES Director actually emailed me. A very nice guy. He's just trying to help my grandpa, and I have no beef with him. I honestly don't blame him for not responding back to me. He was probably expecting 5 questions in the email, and I throw him, you know, close to 77, 80 pages document.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. So a lot of the criticisms you've received come from kind of 2 angles. One is that, one is that they weren't sincere, that you really had already made your mind up before you wrote the letter. That's one. Is that true?
Well, I mean, obviously I didn't lose my testimony or leave the church over not, you know what I mean? I was kind of, I believed, I did my research, and I trusted the research enough to where I stopped believing in the church. But I was sincere in that, like I said, I accepted the possibility that my research could be wrong, right. My sources could be wrong, and that he might have a perspective or a view of the situation that I would never heard about. Okay. So in that sense, I am sincere. I'm upfront in the letter that I didn't believe at the time. If you read, you know, page 5 of the letter, you can clearly see, you know, I'm a disaffected member. I'm just gonna lay it out. So I set it up. I said I'm just gonna lay it out where I'm at with things. So in that sense, that's kind of where I laid it out. So some of the stuff in my CES letter obviously look like conclusions rather than all questions. Yeah. So that's where it comes from. Sure. And I was upfront with the CES Director with that.
Okay. The other one is that you wrote that with the internet in mind, that it was just kind of premeditated, kind of theater. Like, I'm writing this for the internet, but I'll go ahead and send it to the guy anyway.
No.
Just have a good story to support what you end up publishing.
At the time, the only people that I had in mind was the CES Director, my family, because obviously my family was involved. And, you know, a few people on Reddit that I was going to, you know, I just, to get their feedback, to make sure that my sources are okay, and, you know, just general editing on my paper. So, but in my mind, it was just the CES Director and my family for the most part, because I saw this as an opportunity to not only get official answers, but also to explain my train of thought and what happened, explaining why I left the church, or stop believing in the church.
Isn't there the strong desire to tell people and explain? And you referred to it earlier. Everybody judges you. Everybody looks down on you. I had a member of a very prestigious LDS family come visit me the other day. He's you would all know the name, and he's no longer a believer. And what he said to me was, and I hate to use the word cult. I'll just say that now. I hate to use the word cult. I know it's kind of really disrespectful, but the quote really stuck with me. He said, "A cult is any organization that will not let you leave it with your dignity intact." So a cult is an organization that won't let you leave it with your dignity intact. And that goes back to what you were saying about, are you sinning? Are you looking at porn? Are you cheating on somebody? You never had a testimony to begin with. You never like, oh, he left and he's happy. It's more like, oh, he's dark and sinning, and oh, he drinks coffee, and oh, and so I shouldn't be speaking, but really, you just want to be able to explain to people. You want to say, no, there are credible reasons that people leave. And I've actually done a lot of thinking, and I've put a lot of time into this.
Yeah.
And is that what you were thinking?
There are very few people on this planet that I respect and love more than, my grandpa and my dad. And so to have them be disappointed in me, it bothered me a lot. So I wanted to be understood. I wanted to make sure that they understood that I didn't leave because I want to go to the strip club. I left because I came across very disturbing information about the church I never heard before.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of true believing Mormons understand that. They don't understand that desire to be understood. I hate that saying they can leave the church, but they can't leave it alone. John Larson talked about it in Mormon Expression, one of his podcasts. I can't remember which one. But basically it was to the effect of, you live this religion for 30, 35 years. You put all this time into it, all this money into it. You really believe it. It's your worldview. And then, poof, it's gone. And what kind of weird psycho would...
Just move on.
Yeah, okay. Oh,
okay.
What's next?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What kind of weird psycho would do that? It doesn't make, you know what I mean? We're still human beings after we leave. We want to be understood. We still have family that are in. And here's the other thing that a lot of true believing Mormons don't understand is that the family members within are most often seen, the people that leave, as the broken ones, the ones that need help, the ones that need to be rescued, the ones that need to be pulled back into the church, the ones whose testimonies need to be restored, the broken ones. So they don't understand that the disaffected one, they feel like they can't have a true relationship. There's always that 800-pound gorilla in the room. So in an attempt to bring that relationship back to where it was before they left the church, they're trying to educate their family members on the reasons why they left. Yeah. So at the core of it is to be understood and to restore or repair their relationship with their family members. And they see it as the church is getting in the way of that with its, I'll just say it, fundamentalist black and white worldview. You know what I mean?
Okay, so you write, and why make it so comprehensive? So long,
well, I mean,
for the CES director,
well, because to me it wasn't just okay. The Book of Mormon, the Book of Abraham, got some problem. To me, it's I look at each individual issue, and then I take a step back and say, look, I don't just look at the trees, just a tree here and there. I look at the trees individually, and then I take a step back and I look at the forest and I say, really, is this really the forest, like the one and only true forest on the face of the earth? You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't look like it's God's work. It just looks like one clumsy hoax. So what I wanted to illustrate, for example, the Kinderhook place, Joseph Smith might have made a mistake or whatever. Before that, I wanted to illustrate Joseph Smith's character. So when I went over the polygamy and the polyandry stuff, I went over how Joseph Smith had this pattern of behavior over the course of 10 years of his life, where he was hiding and denying polygamy and polyandry, not just from Emma, not just from the saints, but from the world. He's given interviews to newspapers. The Doctrine and Covenants has, officially banned polygamy and put, we believe in monogamy. And then, the affidavit that he put out in the Times and Season, he was so concerned about the rumors circulating in Nauvoo about his polygamy and polyandry that he set up this affidavit with 31 people. And the signers of the affidavit included his plural wife and several other of his buddies that knew about his polygamy. I mean, Elijah Snow was one of his plural wives that he married 3 months earlier. She signed it. The parents, the Bishop Whitney and his wife, were witnesses to one of the ceremonies. I think it was Sarah Whitney, a couple months earlier. So you look at that and you say, well, his pattern of behavior, his modus operandi for 10 years of his life was to hide stuff, to be deceptive, to be dishonest. So it's when you take that snapshot of his character and you start looking into the book of Abraham, and the priesthood restoration and, the backdating of it into the scriptures at the book.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
But I hear you, and this is, with the PhD I've been working on, I admittedly have not had time to study a lot of these things as closely as I would like. So obviously through the podcast, I've heard about the first vision stuff, and I've heard about the translation stuff. It's very, very different when you start lining up the timelines. It's one thing to know that the first vision story changed. Mm-hmm. It's another thing then to realize that what Joseph believed about God, his Trinitarian view about God, when the Book of Mormon was published, is different than what he ends up with Nauvoo. And then when you line up the Book of Mormon with his beliefs in 1830, and it supports the Trinitarian view, and then you learn that they made changes to the Book of Mormon to reflect a non-Trinitarian view later, and you see the changes in the Book of Commandments versus the Doctrine and Covenants, and then he develops his High Nauvoo theology. Well, those timelines across multiple issues all start lining up, and so that's why you wrote a 70-plus page.
Yeah, because if I didn't write a comprehensive overview, it would just be like, that's just one issue. The church is still true. Think mistakes were made. You know what I mean? But when you start to look at it all, the modus operandi, the deception, then you look at the Book of Abraham, then you look at the Kinderhook plate, you just see this pattern. The Book of Mormon, you just see this pattern of, I'll just say it, deliberate fraud.
Yeah. So you write this letter, you send it to the CES Director through email?
Through email, yeah.
Okay.
I attached the PDF.
Did you ever meet the guy in person?
No.
Okay. And what response did you get?
Well, he didn't respond to me directly in email, but he told my grandpa that he read the very well-written letter and that he would provide a response. He also said, a few other things that, the brethren are aware of some of these problems, and they're, whatever that means, but so
I hope they are.
I hope they are, yeah.
They are now.
Well, they better be by now. And so he and they were aware of this, and I guess my understanding is that he forwarded the letter to some of his colleagues that knew more about history. So I was anticipating to hearing back from him.
You sent the letter what month of what year about?
So that was in April of 2013.
Okay.
So I sent
So about a year ago.
Yeah, a year ago.
Did you send it on April 6th just to be funny?
No.
Okay.
April 23rd or whatever it was.
All right. Okay, so about a year ago, and then you waited.
I waited. A month passed, 2 months passed, and 3 months passed, and I started, I'm probably not going to hear back. So at that time, as I mentioned, I had put my letter on Reddit for feedback and for people to.
You put this letter.
This letter, like this, in early April before I sent it out. So a couple people really ate it up. I guess they liked it, and so.
Did you crowdsource the original version, where other people were giving you information and studying with you? Was it a team effort?
No, I just wrote it up, and then I just put it up and say, what do you guys think?
So the original version's all you.
Yeah.
All your study and writing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't get a lot of criticism. I just got, wow, this is kind of cool that you made it all comprehensive. So it kind of spread it around, got viral a little bit, and it ended up getting into the hands of Mormon Think, Tom Phillips, and he really liked it. He emailed me, said, "This is great. Let's put this up." I said, "Cool." So we put it up, and then it really blew up from there.
Okay, so when did it get put up? About?
I don't know, like around that time in late April, somewhere around there.
Okay. Well, that's not a long. You didn't wait 3 months to publish it online.
No, remember, I didn't go out and it went viral. Like some of the people on Reddit that were checking it, they spread it around, and then got into the hands of Mormon Think.
Okay, so how much time did you spend thinking about, do I really want to be a named dissident across the world regarding Mormonism?
I didn't think like that. I didn't realize this was gonna blow up. I just thought it was just a letter, and it would just eventually fade. But when it started getting on Mormon Think, and I started getting emails, and then more emails, and then more emails, I'm like, okay, this is starting to, what did I do? So it just got. I for a while I was kind of concerned. I don't want my name to. I don't want to be this guy that's tearing down the church or anything like that. But when I started getting the emails from people, just hearing from people like, I really struggled with this, and then I came across the CES letter, and then things just snapped for me. It just made sense. I got it because I kept looking at these individual issues. I think what appeals to a lot of people with the CES letter is I don't focus on these different issues on its own. I take a step back and then I tie them up to show how they're all connected and the big picture of things. And I think that that's something that was missing for,
Yeah, why do we need a letter to the CES director? Why not just Mormon Think? Well, how did you think of the letter as being different than Mormon Think? Or the fair website?
I don't know. I mean, Mormon Think did a great job going over all the individual issues. I've used it during my faith crisis. And
did it help you write the letter?
Well, yeah. I mean, there were some things I got from there, but it wasn't just Mormon Think. It was Rough Stone Rolling. It was the insider's view of Mormon origins. Some of Leonard Arrington stuff, and it's just different sources. It wasn't just like I copied, Mormon Think. It was, Rough Stone Rolling and different things here and there.
So were you worried about putting up your own website? When did your own website go up?
Well, what happened was I kept getting people asking me on Reddit, where can I download this letter I've heard about? Where can I download it? So I just put up this really simple one-page website that has a PDF icon, a letter to a CES director where I lost my testimony. And that was just my website for 7 months or so. And then what really changed things was when fairs started getting into the picture and started doing their analysis of the letter. This happened in the summer of 2013.
Let's save that.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to transition just a tiny bit, and we're going to dig into some of the main issues that are covered in the letter.